Hi everyone, I'd like to welcome you once again. Thank you so much for coming out on such a beautiful day to talk about imperialism. I mean, not many people do that. It's, we're narrowing the crowd down, and we appreciate you all for being here and so interested in this matter, which is a crucial issue in the world for sure. So we're going to find out how crucial it is when we hear from our speakers. So we hope you got a chance to read some of the wall posters we put up that deal with the issue, the topic we're talking about today. They're around the room here with blue tape on top of them. There's about 2 dozen of them. And some just each one, some of them have so much information and it's going to take you a while to think it through it. But there's a whole chart over there about AFRICOM, how the whole continent of Africa is being exploited. And of course, Latin America, South America, there's another graphic that shows how involved, how the tentacles of imperialism are just controlling the world. So check these charts out in the wall things. For the fun of it, we made a chart called Capitalism, Imperialism, and divided it into some sort of a graphic. That's a difficult thing to do, and I know we don't all agree with all the words that we use. That's one of the problems we have, is not the terminology that we're using is not understood by everybody the same way. But it's still fun to try to put your pin where you think you are, not where other people think you are, but where you think you are. And let's get a discussion going about exactly what's going on with the split in the left, which is what we're really addressing today also. Also, we had a flyer called On Imperialism. It's a bunch of quotes, definitions. It's also on the wall back there by the doorway. This gives you a little food for fodder. It's, you know, the term imperialism is very complicated. That's why we're talking about it today. Everyone's going to have a take on this. And the audience, of course, can be asked to be part of this after we finish the 6 presentations. So, the loosely termed left is divided along many lines. Communists, socialists, anarchists, Trotskyists, Marxists, Leninists, Stalinists, Maoists, social democrats, democratic socialists, and many more. Definitions have become clouded and they're confused. Yeltsin was a revolutionary, some people say. Communists are fascist, some people say. Democrats are progressive, some people say. These misunderstandings prevent us from working together for common causes. It creates a unique situation where many in the left have, for example, been supporting the U.S. funding of $50 billion for war in Ukraine. Clarity on imperialism, the term itself, has caused many in the left to argue with their comrades. Our attempt here is to gather organizations that consider themselves anti-communist, anti-imperialist, and they fight together, and they want to fight together against many of us believe is the most deadly and destructive force in the world. So Greg Goebbels of ML Today stated, "The great tragedy is that the broad left, the historical foil to war and imperialism, remains divided, confused, and inactive, while a bloody, destructive war rages, threatening to expand and escalate." Ron Jacobs at Counterpunch says, "Ukraine is the perfect war for the U.S.-dominated military-industrial complex. There are no body bags coming home. There's no anti-war demonstrations, and virtually no pressure for negotiations. Indeed, a substantial portion of what usually constitutes the U.S. anti-war movement is actually cheering on the Ukrainian military in this conflict. In short, this is a dream situation, and Washington and its minions will fight to the last Ukrainian to keep the war industry's profits rolling in." That was Ron Jacobs. Margaret Kimberley of Black Agenda Report accurately defines the U.S. as a settler colonial state founded on indigenous genocide, African enslavement, that is still addicted to the doctrine of racial domination today, violent imperialism. So this event will provide a space for the emerging anti-imperialist left to set out its case openly and develop its proposals for dealing with the issues confronting today's world within the atmosphere of mutual respect and tolerance, which today's anti-imperialist framework is fostering. So we've asked 6 representatives of 6 anti-imperialist organizations to speak for about 10 minutes maximum, 8 to 10 minutes. And we asked them to address 3 points. Define your organization, How do you define imperialism? How do you work with it? How do we work together against U.S. imperialism? After these presentations, we want everyone to participate and be part of the discussion. Whatever your position is, whatever you feel, the idea is to be friendly, it's constructive, and productive. So we can disagree on things, but we have to work together to solve problems. So our first speaker of the six of us is the treasurer of the current Michigan Peace Council, Twyla Meyer. She's going to speak for a maximum 10 minutes. So welcome, Twyla Meyer.
So the U.S. Peace Council is a multiracial, pro-working class, anti-imperialist organization committed to peace, economic and social justice, and to international solidarity with the peoples of the world. The U.S. Peace Council was founded in 1979, and our Michigan chapter has been renewed, thank you, Michelle, after a long absence for your beginning in Michigan Peace Chapter. It's affiliated with the World Peace Council, founded in 1949, which is still the world's largest peace organization, and also an NGO member of the United Nations. The guiding principles and objectives of the U.S. Peace Council are, number one, prohibition of all weapons of mass destruction and ending the arms drive, abolition of foreign military bases, U.S. foreign military bases, total and universal disarmament under effective international control, elimination of all forms of colonialism, neocolonialism, racism, sexism, and other forms of discrimination, respect for the right of the peoples to sovereignty and independence, essential for the establishment of peace, respect for the territorial integrity of states, non-interference in the internal affairs of nations, establishment of mutually beneficial trade and cultural relations based on friendship and mutual respect, peaceful coexistence between states with different political systems, and lastly, negotiations instead of use of force in the settlements of differences between nations. We stand for peace and justice. Basic to our mission is the understanding that there cannot be peace without justice, both nationally and internationally. We believe connecting the issues of peace with economic, environmental, social, and political issues is crucial to the success of our movement. We understand that success requires unity among the struggling for peace and justice and encouraging joint coalitions and cross-support. The U.S. Peace Council considers workers who organize for jobs, security, and a livable wage, and community activists who advocate for improvements in housing, education, health care, and the environment, regardless of their political or philosophical worldviews, as its allies. We believe that such concerns are inextricably linked to the issues of world peace and disarmament. International solidarity and support for the people's struggles for national liberation and independence, social justice, and democratic rights around the world are integral to the ideals of the U.S. Peace Council. We see no separation in the struggle for peace and disarmament, and the struggle for people's struggles for national independence, social justice, and democratic rights in Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America. The U.S. Peace Council demands universal disarmament and opposes the doctrine of preemptive strike by the United States, as these policies express the U.S. drive for imperialist domination of nations and resources. This doctrine vitally threatens world peace and the end of international laws, and it undermines the Charter of the United Nations. And finally, on this, we call for the closure of over 750 U.S. foreign bases. That's 3 times as many bases as all the other countries in the world combined, located in 80 different countries. We call for a drastic reduction in the military budget and a transfer of these funds to civilian production, provide jobs, fulfill social needs, move the money from military to social needs. Finally, the U.S. Peace Council recently released its latest statement in the war in Ukraine, entitled, quote, "A manufactured crisis in Ukraine is victimizing the world's peoples," unquote. Some of the main points are: this proxy war by the United States is designed to use the Ukrainian people to mortally disable Russia. Those who profit from war benefit, while those most vulnerable suffer. Ukrainian citizens, but more broadly, working people internationally and especially in the global South. Russia's military intervention in Ukraine could have been avoided if the United States had not relentlessly provoked it. Contrary to its claims, NATO is not a defensive organization. Its purpose from the start has been to act as an instrument for the United States' world domination and to prevent all challenges to the U.S. hegemony. NATO is not a true alliance. It is in fact an integrated imperialist army under the direct U.S. command. It's an integrated imperialist army under direct U.S. command. Its constituent states are bound to dedicate significant portions of their national budgets to maintaining this war machine and to offer up their youth as soldiers. Next, not only has the Ukraine conflict been used to oblige NATO members to buy more weapons from the U.S. military contractors, but larger U.S. objective of economically severing Russia from Europe is being advanced. The reverberating consequences of the conflict and the associated sanctions by the United States and its allies on Russia have been devastating, causing food and fuel shortages globally and ensuing inflation in the cost of living, which most impacting those who can least afford it. We call for rapidly de-escalating the violence and negotiating a peaceful resolution. We call upon the Biden administration to stop fueling the fire and prolonging the war by sending billions of dollars worth of weapons to Ukraine. It is time for these funds to be spent on critically ignored human needs instead of waging imperialist wars against other nations. In the ML Today stated, quote, "An anti-imperialist left is emerging in the West. However, they are derided by both liberals and leftists alike. The left's failure to grasp the central importance of imperialism in today's divisive geopolitical landscape leads to support for wars of aggression, uncritical acceptance of unfounded or spurious propaganda claims, and support for far-right currents in other countries that claim to stand for democracy. The conditions are ripe for socialist organizing and agitation, but class struggle rages within the left when it should be waged by the left. The left is thus now at a crossroads. That section of Western left which is proving unable to understand the role of imperialism is shaping today's conflicts, not only places itself on the verge of historical irrelevance, but becomes a real threat to the advance of socialist and workers' struggles," unquote. The Michigan Peace Council initiated this gathering because we feel the urgency of joining the emerging coalition of Western anti-imperialist forces. And you can join our Michigan Peace Chapter by going to the U.S. Peace Council website, www.uspeacecouncil.org, or our Facebook page, Michigan Peace Council. Thank you.
So next, we're very grateful to Danielle for agreeing to read the statement from Iman Saleh, who found out last night her friend has COVID and she couldn't come here today to spread it around, so she chose not to come here. But instead, Danielle, who is free of COVID, is going to read her speech. So let's welcome Danielle Francisca.
The Yemeni Liberation Movement is a grassroots, volunteer-led organization working to end the war in Yemen. They are against any form of imperialism, colonialism, and militarism everywhere. They actively stand and support struggling communities internationally. Iman Saleh, the general coordinator of the YLM, believes that the fractional left can begin to come together by first understanding our own local struggle and how it affects our communities here. It's important for us to build with each other and support each other with our everyday needs. U.S. imperialism relies on our individualism, not just here, but abroad as well. And because our homelands have been colonized, we also have to understand how do we decolonize our minds. Iman also believes that imperialism is one of the many tentacles of capitalism, reaching far and wide with the support of many monsters, not just the US, but the UK, Israel, Saudi Arabia, China, and many more. We have to understand what self-determination means exactly and how this applies to the struggling communities of our comrades. We believe Yemen has its own right to self-determination and no country should be allowed to wage war with Yemen. Saudi Arabia and its coalition's agenda is to secure oil trade by weakening Yemen. And thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. Now we're going to have Cameron Harrison come up and speak on behalf of the CPUSA, Communist Party USA.
How's everybody doing? I'm good. All right. So I'm going to begin by talking about imperialism, and mostly, well, first let me talk. For those who don't know, the Communist Party, we are a Marxist-Leninist party founded in 1919, and we're the party of the working class and the oppressed in the United States. So with imperialism, I'd like to talk about our view as Marxist-Leninists, and we work off Lenin's definition. So through settler colonialism in the early development of industrial capitalism, the most advanced countries had divided the world up, created borders, and oppressed and exploited underdeveloped nations for resources. By the early 20th century, Lenin posited that the era of imperialism began with the combining of finance and industrial capital. This combination of capital resulted in the development of monopoly capitalism, or the highest stage of capitalism. This development led to the formation of international monopolies and cartels and rival alliances of states to divide and redivide the world over. The constant search for new markets and higher profits in a world focused on private property and relentless competition has led to the further exploitation of oppressed nations and the working class, the drive towards fascism and war, which is really just competition solved by other means, and the pillaging of the Earth's resources. In the US, some of the ways we can readily recognize imperialism is by looking at the main profiteers of war the last 3 decades. The fossil fuel industry, think Iraq, and also now Ukraine, and the fossil fuel monopolies are reaping massive profits off this current war. The IMF and the monopoly banks who trap oppressed nations in debt and keep them beholden to hedge funds. And Silicon Valley, who is, progressive capitalists, who produce technology and surveillance for imperialist nations such as the United States and the apartheid state of Israel. So how does the CPUSA handle imperialism? Well, the CPUSA has a long history of internationalism since its founding, which expressed itself first in the Third International, or the Comintern, during the times of the Soviet Union. And today, we see ourselves in the International Meeting of Communist and Workers' Parties, or Saleh. These relationships help workers and their parties from various countries organize and strategize. Since the capitalists are organized and function internationally, so must the working class movement. As anti-imperialists and as communists, our main duty against imperialism is to fight against our own ruling class, who happen to be the largest, most powerful, brutal imperialists the world has ever known. It's not our priority to criticize other countries in times of imperialist war, but rather our own government's role. And this brings me to what Bill said earlier. The United States Congress just passed another $40 billion package, war package really, to Ukraine, which is larger than the entire budgets of most countries' military, or most military budgets of countries, including Russia's. And this is just for 1 year. As Gus Hall, our former party chairman, stated, the struggle against imperialism complements the struggle against racist suppression in the United States. The struggle against racist suppression at home is an important contribution to the struggle against U.S. imperialism in the world. The enemy is the same. So, what we try to do is we try to seek and be a part of and help build a powerful anti-war, anti-racist, anti-sexist, and anti-fascist movement here in our own country. This is the best way for us to help the workers and oppressed of other nations. Our role seriously needs to be on building a large, broad peace movement, and it must be considered within the context of fighting the fascist danger. Claudia Jones, another CPUSA leader, stated, imperialism is the root cause of racism. It is the ideology which upholds colonial rule and exploitation. It is the ideology which breeds fascism, which is rightly condemned by the civilized people of the whole world, and hopefully everybody here. And as the Communist Party's National Committee said recently, the serious problems of climate change, lack of health care, low-wage jobs, institutional racism, these issues challenging our working class cannot be solved while the United States spends billions each year on maintaining a massive military force and weaponry and spending this money on NATO, which is an aggressive military alliance. Consider that billions could be found for the military budget and billions could be found for Ukraine, but the progressive compromise with the other Democratic wing for Build Back Better is said to be too costly. And then this is why we need to focus on building a broad mass movement centered on peace, jobs, housing, and to racist oppression, to name a few. Only when we have mobilized millions united in action, led by the working class and oppressed themselves, can we begin to offset the balance of forces that are currently favoring the imperialist and the fascist. Thank you.
Thank you, Cameron. Well, everyone's staying under the time limit. I haven't had a chance to play the bell yet. All right. Okay, cool. All right. So let's see. Next, did you notice how he did something that really struck me? He said, the Silicon Valley, the progressive Silicon. He did this, meaning that's the problem we have in the left. They call themselves progressive, so we work with them. There's a co-opting of the left by the CIA. There's a whole thing about that, how the left is being used as an anti-communist left. So Ben Norton speaks a lot about that, and there's a tremendous webinar with Ben Norton from Multipolarista. I don't know if you know Ben Norton. He's a person to look into. He used to be with, with the Gray Zone, right? Okay, so now our next speaker, we'd like to invite Tobin Sterritt, who's going to speak on behalf of the LRNA. Right? Okay, Tobin, let's welcome Tobin to the stage. Tobin Sterritt.
Good afternoon. My name is Tobin Sterritt, and I'm with the League of Revolutionaries for a New America. We'll just call it LRNA for short from here on out. And I'm going to start this up a little differently with a personal anecdote I think might be illustrative of why we're here, what we're here to talk about today. When me and my brother were small kids, we each got a candy bar from our parents as a reward for something. I got a Three Musketeers bar, and I was really looking forward to to having that because they look so delicious on TV. They always look more delicious than they actually are. My brother's got a Hershey's bar. And that afternoon, our friends come to drop by in our backyard, and rule is when you got something like that, you share, among others. That's what we're taught. Then a couple of the big kids from the neighborhood drop by. One of them takes charge of the situation. Okay? And he decides, we're going to share. But it's going to be on his terms. We're not consulted. And the Three Musketeers bar went away. The Hershey's bar went away, and they were shared. Okay? So I was reduced to begging him for a piece of my candy bar, or my candy bar. Okay? And what he'd do each time is he'd break off a tiny bit of the Hershey's bar and give it to me to pacify me, or something. So in the end, I wound up getting like 2 little pieces of Hershey's bar. Fighting him was out of the question. He was 3 times my size. Arguing with him, I was either too scared to or I didn't know how. Okay? So if you understand where I'm going with that anecdote, then you possess at least a rudimentary understanding of what imperialism entails. Okay? It's a highly developed system of economic domination in which the involves at its core control, economic domination, control is subordinate body at the economic and political levels of power. Right? It has military power, intelligence service, deep state, deep resources of NGOs and think tanks at its disposal, and overwhelming influence on the global financing system. And I'm recoding this here, but V.I. Lenin said a little over a century ago that defined imperialism as the monopoly stage of capitalism, with the merging of financial and industrial capitalism representing the highest stage, ruled by a tiny percentage of the world population, in command of the wealth and taking it out of the society, the bodies and the collective labors of the rest of us. They're the big kid. And the examples are quite easy to locate. U.S.'s aggressive foreign policy targets countries that historically have shown steadfast resistance to imperialism. That's the cardinal sin right there. But it's not really much of an exaggeration to say that U.S. targets them. It'd probably be a good idea to take a look at them and see what they're doing right, because chances are it's something that the U.S. hates. Bolivia, China, Cuba, Colombia, Chile, Democratic Republic of Congo, Eritrea, Haiti, Iran, Nicaragua, North Korea, Peru, Venezuela. I could go twice more through the alphabet. I think they're all up there on one of our little posters back there. The list is staggering. Okay? These are countries that tend to be rich in natural resources. A lot of them have robust socialist systems. It's another deep source of exploitation. It's one of the first things to go when they restructure. And that's self-determination is precisely what the imperialists don't want. So with that, I've been a member of the League of Revolutionaries for 10 years now. And the standpoint we're coming from has been a largely domestic one. Its membership was born out of the League of Revolutionary Black Workers here in Detroit and the Communist Labor Party. It started in 1993. And the standpoint from which they were coming is that the transformation from electromechanical industry requiring human labor to operate these gigantic means of industrial production to digitally controlled production requiring little or no human labor was the determining content of our time. As a result, we were seeing a growing number of precariatized workers in a wide spectrum of professions, which are already over 40% of the U.S. workforce, along with a growing number of unemployed sector, structurally unemployed, and just absolutely destitute homeless workers. And that these economic problems cannot be solved without the public ownership of the socially necessary means of production and the distribution of the social product according to need. And that's been our standard. We've had a lot of good people do a lot of good work at the border on immigration issues and the raging injustices around U.S. Immigration policies. But our view has not extended much beyond that. Where our money goes, what we're paying for, and what it's doing. and where that wealth that's extracted goes, because we certainly don't see it. And even if we did see it, is that the kind of world you want to live in right there, have it coming out of somebody else's hide? So League's focus has always been largely domestic, but lately some of us have been creating or charting what for the League is kind of new territory, going deeper into what solidarity with the struggles of countries resisting U.S. imperialism means for us, for the world, and for those countries. And one of the questions we are confronted with when we talked about this is why limit the scope to U.S. imperialism and non-imperialism everywhere? Well, the reasons are twofold. One, we lead the world in military presence with over 700 military bases around the world. We have an unparalleled economic reach, as our sanctions regime has proven with regard to Cuba for over 70 years, Venezuela in the last decade, and most recently Russia. The U.S. also has enormous influence on the UN Security Council and global finance institutions. So in this instance, starting locally just makes sense. The second, understanding imperialism is not just to understand it from a global standpoint, but to connect it with our struggles here in the United States and its impact on us. Elements of neoliberalism, of neoconservatism, colonialism and white supremacy, which are ideologically wed, that drives U.S. imperialism, are prevalent in the gradual deterioration of our society in which we live. 35 to 40% living at or below the poverty line, prison industrial complex, the highest proportion of the population imprisoned of any country in the world, disproportionately people of color. An average of 1,000 fatalities, 1,000 killings, murders at the hands of police. And that's just when we started counting in the last few years. It could be more. Okay. And 1 million casualties, plus, and growing from COVID-19, homelessness, the eroding middle class, educational outcome averages across the country, the privatization of our healthcare system, the public education system, as well as the pervasive corporate influence and control of our political system. Clearly, this is not, it's not society that benefits from this imperial conquest. It's a process that's replicated around the globe with far more destructive and devastating consequences, but imperialism is not an unassailable entity. It's not the natural order of things, and it can be beaten. It's a long haul and it's a difficult task, but it can be fought, and it can and will eventually be defeated, even if it falls by its own hand. So our continued existence and the planet's existence even really depend upon its defeat. So this is a huge subject. It can feel overwhelming at times. What can we do? Even getting this together, this little speech together wasn't easy for me, but it's a start. So a couple of things we do in the League is in the study, we educate. We study and we educate based on what we learn. You know, we don't claim any expertise. We're people just like everybody else in the room. So researching the countries that are targets of foreign policy is one way. It's key to gaining clarity on their history and the history of our involvement with them. And to our end, I'm glad to say that we, part of a committee, had started a project called the International Study Collective about a year and a half ago. We've been meeting on Sunday mornings via Zoom for almost a year and a half. We just discovered we just got off a huge in-depth study of China. We have a website that we're working on getting updated, and if you're interested, we'd love to have you join us on Sundays. Drop in, see what it's about. Another way we can work together is to join other groups, network, at places like this. I'm also a member of the Michigan Peace Council. You know, we're not going to harmonize on every note, but if we're singing the same tune, that's good enough for now. This is global unity is a condition for our national emancipation, and the League extends its hand of comradeship around the globe. I extend my hand of comradeship to you. It's an honor. Thank you.
So our next speaker is from the General Baker Institute. Everyone knows the name General Baker, famous name here in Detroit, tremendous activist. And they now have a building on Livernois, a great community center north of the Lodge Freeway on Livernois. And to speak on behalf of that organization today is a gentleman named Abdul Donald Roberts, and we'd like to invite him to the stage. Donald, come on.
I am so happy to be here. This is a full circle for me. A real full circle. My mother was pregnant when she found out that Paul Robeson was going to speak here in 1946. I was born in February 47, so it had been in 46. And anyway, here I am. Again. But in the meantime, boy, oh boy, that is a story. And when I told that story to Reverend Rowe about 10 or 11, he said, what? And so I can't wait to see Reverend Rowe, because I want to find out if he did his research on that or not. But in the meantime, Donald Abdul Roberts is my half-ass slave name. My movement name during my drum years, it started off as Dhaka Abdul Rashesh. The Dhaka came from Shaka, Zulu, South Africa, and the Abdul part came from J. Rogers' volume 1 or 2, World's Great Men of Color. Abdul was a servant, two kind of ways. He was a servant for the richest master, and he was also a servant for the strangers who came in the territory to trade. Basically, I'm talking about Timbuktu, Ghana, last of the kingdoms before colonialism and neo-colonialism decided to travel into imperialism. But in the meantime, I come from, I was born and raised in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I got kicked out of school in the first semester of the 9th grade, and that brings me to a point right now. I got on the honor roll in the 8th grade at Slauson Junior High by historical default. But one of the things my social studies teacher taught me, Mrs. Sardi, was about the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. And basically, back then, I already knew that from the mayor on up to the Pentagon, the executive branch told the military branch what to do. They didn't have no say-so whatsoever about the laws and rules and regulations of the military. So I'm at a loss as to why the movement is still trying to get police officers arrested and not their supervisors or the mayor, and it just baffles my mind. So I just want to say this fight against particular police without bringing in the decision makers is a backward position. Anyway, moving right along, I got caught up in that one too, because when I got kicked out of school, they used military force, which is another story that comes up to this story about imperialism. You really got me in a predicament here, because I didn't know. I thought this was a breach when it mentioned the Communist Party and Gus Hall. I grew up under John Reed, who wrote 10 Days That Shook the Earth. And then, well, John Reed, he's buried in the Soviet Union, right next to Lenin. And so I'm confused to how, right now, you still speak of Gus Hall without speaking of John Reed. So that's one thing among many. The other thing about, let me talk about the General Baker Institute. We started off in drum like this. And I'm gonna start off with this poem, which Oral Rosser got murdered November of 14, the same year that General Baker passed form. He passed form in May, and that's another story. Jim was working on something, and May that month goes back to 1871, the French Revolution. And I said, Jim couldn't have been waiting for May to bring up the Paris Commune. But you know what? You can't underestimate General Baker. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. But in the meantime, going back to John Reed, there was also John North. And John Reed and John North, both of them was in Mexico working with Pancho Villa, and I think his name was Emilio Esperanza. But anyway, he was a revolutionary too during that period. And for want of a better term, he was the black Mexicano, if you will. So these are some characters that need to be lifted up along with the struggle of imperialism in its early stages. I did want to name off some books in reference to internal and external energy. First of all, excuse me first, but moving right along, this is, I've never done a speech where I actually tried to prepare to say something ahead of time. And that's never been my style, so I'm at a loss of how to put this together in sequence that's understandable. But one of the things that we didn't do during the drum years was we didn't know how to eat right. And so we burned out a lot. Sometimes we would work 2 or 3 days on a campaign and figure out, when's the last time you ate? Well, I ate 2 or 3 days ago. I ate a day and a half. You didn't exist. Well, when's the last time you had to sleep? Where did you go to sleep? So, you know what I'm saying? The struggle gets tough. And if you're not healthy enough to promote the struggle, you're going to make unhealthy decisions in that process. And so I like to bring up a few books in reference to that. One of them is the book of Macrobiotics by Michio Cuscio and Alex Jack. And what they've done is summarize all the science or put it in a scientific sequence on how to stay healthy, which is going back, Ayurveda, World War II, Japan, blah, blah, when they dropped the bomb. And one of the stories I like about that was in that book was when they dropped the bomb on Hiroshima, the next place was Nagasaki. And to make a long story short on that, the doctor put all the staff and the patients on seaweed soup. So when the smoke cleared, they had a bare minimum of radiation from the bomb when they dropped it on Nagasaki. So I want to say that. And then African Holistic Health by Dr. Lyon. That's another story. That's a good one. It's black orientated. But what I'm trying to say about our health is, if you're not healthy, you're not going to make healthy decisions. And I'm going to rest my case and go from here.
Thank you very much, Abdul. Donald Roberts, and that's from the General Baker Institute. how many people have been to that building, that source over there? Yes, yes. Great source for the left. Thank you so much, Abdul, for coming all the way from Ann Arbor. And we're going to conclude the speakers right now with a person who I've known for many years. And it reminds me of the fact that she's here representing an organization, but she's in a lot of organizations, like a lot of us are. We're in many organizations, and she's one of the founders of this local branch and very active with this particular Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. And she spoke here many times at this place, at the wonderful Peace Museum. So let's welcome to the stage Laura Dewey.
Bill, thank you for organizing this event. I'm not that old, Bill. The Detroit branch of WILF was formed, we think, in the late 40s, early 50s. We're not sure. Right. I became chair of it, in the 2000s, but I joined it in the 1994 when my daughter was a couple of years after she was born. First, I'll introduce you to what WILF is, talk a little bit about the definition of imperialism, and then I'll reframe the question of how to build an anti-imperialist movement. WILF was born, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom was born during World War I, after nearly 1,000 women from 13 countries traveled to the Netherlands to attend the International Congress of Women at The Hague. And this opened on April 28, 1915. The purpose of the conference was to convince the belligerent countries to negotiate and end the war. From this, WILF was born. It was headed by Jane Addams, and it became one of the first non-governmental organizations in the United Nations. The U.S. section of WILF is engaged in anti-war and anti-nuclear activism, but our vision is actually more expansive, as stated in our vision statement, and I quote, WILF envisions a transformed world at peace where there is racial, social, and economic justice for all people, everywhere. Now, we're also involved in Middle East peace issues, environmental activism, food sovereignty issues, anti-racism work, and more. We recognize that a lot of these issues are interconnected. Now, in 1945, the U.S. signaled itself as the foremost imperialist country when it bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But a year earlier, when the Roosevelt administration negotiated the Bretton Woods Agreement among Western powers and Japan, and this is the agreement in which the United States dollar became the world's reserve currency in the new financial order. And in the early 1970s, the U.S. and Saudi Arabia came to an agreement in which the Saudis would accept only U.S. dollars for all their oil sales to all countries, in exchange for weapons and military protection from the U.S. This was the launch of what eventually became known as the petrodollar, which is basically U.S. dollars that are used to purchase oil, and then those dollars are deposited into Western banks, conveniently so. This ensured that the U.S. would remain supreme economically. So while we often define imperialism in terms of war, it is also economic. And another example of imperialism is NAFTA, the agreement that forced Mexico to purchase corn from our American farmers, flooded Mexico with cheap corn, and this ruined the Mexican subsistence farmers. The theft of natural resources, such as oil in Nigeria, is another example of imperialism. I'm going to argue that the peace movement is actually anti-imperialist, even though it doesn't identify itself as such. When we protested the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we protested the NATO bombing of Libya, for example, we were protesting imperialistic wars. Imperialism is at the heart of capitalism. That is, to survive, capitalism must grow, capture ever more markets, and the most efficient ways to do this are to wage war, capture resources, and impose economic will on other countries. As we know, the war in Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11 and had more to do with denationalizing the oil industry and generating profits for the likes of Halliburton, Blackwater, and other corporations. One could also argue that some elements of the peace movement are also anti-imperialist because they oppose all war, imperial or otherwise. Excuse me. But there are many in WILF and in the peace movement who also, what I actually meant to say is that they're also anti-capitalist. There are many in the WILF and the peace movement who call themselves socialists, And they understand that our for-profit economic system is not working for most of us. A lot of single issues organizations actually are engaged in anti-capitalist work, even if they don't identify as such. An environmental group that works to stop a pipeline, a gun control group that seeks to ban military-style rifles, are waging campaigns against capitalism in the sense that capitalists don't like those campaigns for one reason. If those campaigns work, they will impinge on the profits made by oil companies and gun manufacturers. Now, this is only an objective sense. These groups subjectively don't see themselves as anti-capitalist. So I think that the peace movement is already anti-imperialist to a certain extent. So I'd like to reframe the question, which is, how do we expand the peace movement? To grow, the peace movement must be broad and inclusive. We need to build a peace constituency, a pro-peace public. This means convincing all sorts of organizations and individuals, such as unions, environmentalists, racial justice groups, single-issue organizations, PTAs, progressive Democrats, independents, and even some Republicans, that they have a stake in peace. We also need to participate in other movements and help grow a larger movement for peace and justice, something other speakers have already referred to. The left can be a part of this, but to be successful, the left must look outward and organize beyond ourselves. What do we need to become an anti-imperialist nation? Well, we need to put the needs of people and the environment first. We need to end minority rule. That means getting rid of this damn electoral college, setting up citizens redistricting commissions, ending winner-take-all style elections, and most importantly, getting money out of politics, or reversing Citizens United. We have to cut the military budget. And we have to have progressive taxes, which means taxing corporations and the rich at the 1950s levels. Obviously, this is a tall order. It will take a broad movement of millions of people to push for these measures. This means empowering the masses of people to take control of our country. And when a nation does that, when a nation starts to put people first, it will put wars last. I think that what the peace movement and other organizations need to do, well, peace movements need to do, is to connect peace issues with other issues. And one of the broadest ways to do this is to talk about the military budget versus human needs, a war economy versus a peace economy. So we need to talk about how are we going to fund healthcare, jobs, green energy, etc., transportation, my dream, transportation. A bus arrives every 15 minutes, night and day. You do not need a schedule. That's public transportation in my mind. So what we need to do is to talk about how that the Pentagon budget is growing, obviously. I mean, Biden asked for more. Congress gave them even more, which is ridiculous. And we need to talk to people and groups about this issue. Now, aside from connecting peace with human needs, we need to connect it to global climate change and the environment. We need to connect it to race and racism and white supremacy and labor rights. We also need to work on abolishing nuclear weapons, which pose at least 3 threats. Number one, they are a drain on our economy. We are on track to spend over $1 trillion just to upgrade our arsenal. And they pose the threat of nuclear accident, but also they give nuclear countries the overwhelming power to threaten other countries and to impose their foreign policy. So if we're going to be anti-imperialists, we must demand an end to the nuclear era. We also need to work on international solidarity. Remember CASC, all those those solidarity groups we had in the 80s? And we also need to talk about labor solidarity, environmental solidarity, which is so important in our globalizing world. I want to suggest a few practical ideas for building the peace movement. We got to be practical, strategic, and plan for the long term. We're in this fight for the long haul. Peace and justice groups are good at organizing one-off events, but we need to be more strategic. You know, for example, let's say we want to support legislation. There's a bill that Eleanor Holmes Norton has proposed for several years called the Nuclear Weapons Abolition and Economic and Energy Conversion Act. Well, if we're going to support that, we have to be strategic. We have to build a multi-year campaign to organize the support. We have to include specific steps and goals that are measurable, and we have to assess what works and what doesn't. Second, I think that we need to reach out to labor, environmental, anti-racism, neighborhood, and other groups. We should ask them, give them a call. Hey, can we talk at your next meeting? Would you like to come to our next meeting and tell us about your issue? We need to start a dialogue about how we can work together. We need to participate in other movements. Yesterday I was at the Silence the Violence rally, there to get signatures actually, but I ended up marching with them. And I thought, shoot, Wilf should have been there. Peace Action should have been there. All these peace groups, Huntington Woods for Peace should have been there. What was wrong with us? Okay, I'm almost done. And so we need to be out there. We need to support groups like Silence the Violence, March for Our Lives, Moms Demand Action. We need to build a media campaign, or it's just sort of something I'd like to see, a media campaign with other organizations that links military spending to their issues. For example, I'd love to see a sign or a message, a meme on social media that says, I'd rather have good schools instead of a new F-35 fighter jet, or high-speed rail, or money for war, you choose. Every month target a different issue, and keep it up, and every group would have to send out the same message. And then finally, I just think that we should use the existing legislation that's been passed by the House to our advantage. You know, legislation might not always get passed, but it does offer opportunities to organize. And good legislation out there is Eleanor Holmes Norton's bill, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, the PRO Act. Now, most people already support these bills, but that support has to be mobilized in the form of actions ranging from phone calls to civil disobedience to pressure the Senate to act. Only the widest possible movement will create change, and the left must fully engage in the process of building these movements and not stand outside them. We know it's hard work. We can do it. We've done it before. We can do it again. Thank you.
When Putin started this Ukraine stuff this time, my comment, when people were so appalled, I said, well, all he has to do is say, manifest destiny, you know, and people didn't seem to get what I was trying to say. Manifest destiny worked for the United States. Come on, what are you complaining about? All he's trying to do is just, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery.
Thank you, Sherry.
That one I remember.
My name is Sammie Lewis. I'm a social justice and anti-capitalist organizer. I'm going to take my mask off. I've jotted down a few thoughts after this panel and just want to say thank you everyone for speaking. Someone said that we have to focus on the imperialism that our own country is creating, and I want to highlight that imperialism overseas mirrors police brutality here. The fact that US police have so much extra gear that they are sending it to Ukraine should model the fact that the US police are completely prepared to use these hyper-militarization weapons on the people here. US police departments have the same training as IDF, Israeli Defense Forces. Individual police budgets cost more than many countries' military budgets. $205 billion on law enforcement, amounting to $123 billion on policing, and $82 billion on corrections and imprisonment. As the pandemic persists, we the people have come into more and more struggles to even just survive, yet alone live. The cost of living goes up while wages remain the same. We are expected to pay for war and pay back our debts to stay alive during a pandemic when the US spends imaginary money that belongs to us, the people. It is a responsibility of leftists alike to oppose of defense budget increases. NATO expansion is solely about placing more profit and power in the hands of the US. There is no such thing as liberation for all until the most oppressed are free. We need to do a better job at meeting people with their values when we do want to bring people in and sway people to our side. And I want to talk a lot more about defunding with defense, with the police. That seems to be a really scary word for a lot of people, but defunding doesn't mean that that money just disappears. It means that that money can be redistributed elsewhere to the things that we, the people, actually need. So thank you.
My name is Jerry Goldberg, and I'm representing a Party for Socialism and Liberation. I just want to say a couple words. And first I want to thank Bill and Twyla and the Michigan Peace Council for putting this very, very important meeting together. It's a critical meeting at this juncture in the struggle. Let me begin by saying, when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the ruling class, U.S. ruling class, published a paper, a Pentagon doctrine, that basically said their vision for a post-Soviet world. And what it was that the U.S. imperialism would dominate the world. It was a unipolar world. And they named every area that they thought could be a threat to that domination, and it was everywhere. It was Europe, it was Africa, it was Latin America, it was everywhere. Because that was their vision. They were going to dominate the world, and they thought their moment had come with the collapse of the Soviet Union. In the recent period, though, their vision has gotten a little shaky. Russia emerged as it's a capitalist country, and we all know that. It's not the Soviet Union that many of us supported. But still, it is independent, somewhat independent of U.S. imperialism, and it was seen during the Syria conflict where Russia's aid to Syria allowed Syria to basically defeat U.S. imperialism in an imperialist conflict there. And especially, they're furious over China, which they thought they had won over to the capitalist wing, that instead used many of the capitalists that they let in to develop an independent economy that now is economically developed and extends solidarity to oppressed people all over the world. It offers an alternative for oppressed nations that are developing to get technology free of the domination of U.S. imperialism. I firmly believe that what the U.S. sees in this conflict is their chance to turn things around again, to impose that unipolar world where U.S. imperialism dominates every single area. And that's why they provoked the war. They provoked the war, as many speakers have said, by refusing legitimate demands by Russia, basic demands to just have security on their border. They provoked the war, they created this war, and then they used this invasion, and whatever we think of whether it was correct for Russia to do it, they said, wow, this was an opportunity for us to take advantage of it and to impose our vision of a unipolar world to create the domination. To even send a message to the European allies, you don't trade with Russia, you don't get oil from me, you get oil from us. To send a message to countries all over the world, you're going to depend on us. And don't think it doesn't extend to China. What did Biden just said? Biden threatened military action against China over if China was to take action to bring Taiwan, which is part of China, back into its fold. That's what this war is about. It's a critical, and the U.S. ruling class is in a frenzy over this war. And let's make no mistake, if you look at the vote that just took place in Congress on the war, every single Democrat voted for the $40 billion in military. That includes the progressive wing of the party, Rashida, the squad, Barbara Lee, who always was one of the few progressive voices in Congress during the Iraq War, went with Pelosi to the Ukraine to rip up the war. The so-called liberal wing of the Democratic Party that kind of weakened the progressive wing has collapsed in the face of ruling class propaganda. And that's why we, as anti-imperialists, have a special responsibility to be together, to be firm, and to be out there. Because no one else is going to do it. No one else is going to do it. I'm not so worried that the masses of people can't see through this. I was in Benton Harbor last week for a rally about water, and 3 speakers denounced the U.S. support for the Ukraine. No one wasn't me. I was struck by that. The polls show that support for U.S. involvement in Ukraine is going down. But let's be honest, if there's not a voice to express that opposition will not find its way. It won't just spontaneously find its way. We know better than that. There has to be a voice that's out there that gives clarity to the message of what this war is really about and how it's really a war that's stealing the resources that are needed by people in the U.S. and all over the world and using them to create war and destruction on the behalf of a handful of multinational corporations. That's why we have to be firm, we have to be strong, we have to be out there, and we are the ones who've got to do it. And let's stay together. That's why a panel like this is together, and we got to be ready to get out in the streets. I was thinking of Hiroshima days. I mean, one of the things they've done is they revived the idea that a nuclear war is winnable. Read what's been in the paper. This idea is being revived now by the Pentagon mad people. They're reviving this idea that a nuclear war is winnable. Think about it. We have to be out there to counter it. We're the ones who are going to be out there because we understand that it's a product of the system and we have no affinity with the system whatsoever. We're the ones to fight it. Let's get out there and have confidence that if we're out there, we will trigger them, we will reach the masses, and we can take our message to the masses. But if we're not out there, no one else is going to be. So thanks for this meeting. Let's stick together and let's think about how to take this struggle from forums and into the streets. Thank you.
Revolutionaries, right? Right, Bill?
Gotcha.
All right. By revolutionaries, we mean that the only way that these problems are really going to be solved is if we take political power. The only way that these problems are going to be solved is if we have a system of socialism. We can keep knocking on the door of this capitalist system and asking for these reforms. We know we're never going to get them from this system. And ultimately, we have to conceive of the fact that we can create a new system. Other countries have created new systems. We can create a system that isn't run by this small group of people. It's going to take us time to learn this, but as we keep knocking on that door, we want this reform, we want that reform, we got to fight for these reforms, but ultimately I think that we have to consider, just like Jerry said, we are capable of leading this society. We're as smart or smarter than the ones that are leading it now. We have the skill sets than the ones that are leading it now. And what are they leading us toward? They really don't deserve to have political power. They are not doing anything to help us and to help this country. They are a ruling class that's seen its time. They got to go. So I think we got to consider that we have to ultimately take political power. How we do that, what our path to that is, I'm not sure. We have to fight on these battles for health care, etc. But we know we're not going to get universal health care out of the system. We're going to only get universal health care when we take control, when we take power, when we make a new system. This isn't something new. Other countries have made new systems. China made a new system. Venezuela's making a new system. Nicaragua's making a new system. How do we have to consider this, that we need a new system. Also, I think when we had our webinar recently on China, we called it Seeking Truth from Facts, a conversation about China, because there's so many misconceptions about China. It's authoritarian, they don't have any democracy. From studying China, my assignment was to study the governance of China, and I discovered they're a hell of a lot more democratic than us. You know, they have people's councils all the way from the neighborhood to national people's councils. They have consultative Congress where different organizations, women organizations, artists, people who are they have 9 political parties in China. 8 other political parties fought against the nationalists and made the Chinese Revolution. And they're part of the governance of China today. On their on their flag, they have 5 stars. They have the Communist Party as a large star. They have 4 smaller stars. The agricultural workers, the industrial workers, the small shop owners, and the national patriotic capitalists. They're all part of a united front to build a new China. So we studied all of this, and I think that we have to, just as Tobin said, we have to study, we have to learn these facts. For example, Putin didn't start this war. Putin didn't invade Ukraine. This started in 2014 when the U.S. and the CIA overthrew the democratically elected government of the Ukraine. Because the Ukraine had to make a decision. Are we going to side with the European Union? Are we going to side with Russia as we traditionally have? And they decided, well, the deal from the EU isn't very good. I think we're just going to wait on this. I think we should continue our relationship with Russia. So what happened? The CIA, who Victoria Nuland admitted they put $5 billion into this, that we have been funding Nazis since World War II. These Nazi stay-behind groups. Stefan Bandera, who was made the national hero of the Ukraine, was a Nazi who fought with the Nazis in World War II. who killed more people than the Nazis did, who was crueler than the Nazis were. The U.S. used these Nazis as Azov Battalion, this right sector, as the fighting force to overthrow the democratically elected government. They then outlawed Russian as a second language, and when people rebelled in the East, which is Russian-speaking, they called them terrorists, and they attacked them. Finally, they held off and started this Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republic, and they signed these Minsk Accords, which I think Bill referred to, where they're going to make these provinces part of Ukraine, having some independence. The U.S. refused to abide by these Minsk agreements. Russia offered some new security agreements. They refused. Finally, Russia, seeing that Ukraine was massing 100,000 troops on its border, struck first. So that's how it went down. I don't mean to talk too long, but we've got to seek truth from facts. We've got to research these situations. If we take all our news from the mainstream media, we're just getting lies and propaganda to promulgate an evil system. Just like it's been said, military bases all over the world experimenting with biological warfare. They found 36 labs in the Ukraine experimenting with COVID, experimenting with smallpox. We now have we don't know what the hell they're trying to do, but they will do anything to preserve their power. We've got to study this stuff. So we invite you to come to our study group. We invite you to find alternative sources of information. If you get your information from the mainstream press, you won't know a damn thing. Thank you.
I'm Jim Rine. I'm with the local chapter of Veterans for Peace. I'm also with the national part of Veterans for Peace, the Climate Crisis and Militarism Project. And I just want to point out that we think one way of getting peace groups more involved, there are a lot of peace groups, to get more people to peace action, is that there's an awful lot of folks, especially young people, that are really worried about climate change, and they should be. I'm a retired research geologist. I know it's happening, and I know it's going to be bleak if we don't do something. So there'll be some pamphlets that are being passed out in the back, or not passed out, but I'll put them in the holder by the back door. But as far as Ukraine, we've had statements on the Veterans for Peace website. Statements. The Ukraine war started about the same time that the IPCC report came out, and we really can't see how there's going to be a prolonged conflict in the Ukraine, and we're going to do anything about climate change. And one thing a lot of people have looked at: if you increase military spending, your emissions go up typically. So we need to end this war, and hopefully the folks in NATO, which are very proactive on climate change, will figure out that we need to end this war as soon as possible. Now, maybe folks, I just finished reading this book, which was really depressing, by David Vine, United States of War. It really goes into a lot of details. It sort of psychoanalyzes the state that we're in as far as the United States. It starts imperialism with when Columbus started or came to Guantanamo Bay, and just sort of progressed. We've been doing this, the Western expansion, as you said, the Manifest Destiny, yes. So we've been doing this for centuries, and hopefully we'll stop, but thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad my first statement was helpful. Trying to point out, not to people in this room, but to other people, is look at our own country and what it has done. I was trying to figure out this General Anthony Wayne, because when I go to Georgia, where my folks last lived, and I'm cleaning up what they left behind, I drive through Wayne County, Michigan, Detroit, where all of us were born. I drive through Huntington, West Virginia, which is Wayne County. I drive through Waynesboro in Georgia on my way. I said, well, who is this Wayne? Well, there's 16 counties in our country that are named after him. And 30-some cities and colleges and everything. I found a book that was not praising him, and it's called Autumn of the Black Snake and the Establishment of the U.S. Army. it's also pretty horrifying. The United States Army was started in 1790s. George Washington wanted it. What we had before that were state militias, which were people they just called up with their little muskets or something that couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. And those people stayed kind of whenever they wanted to. They didn't have uniforms, sometimes not even food or anything. And General Washington had wanted a real army. He wanted a real army to, quote, move, remove, or exterminate, if necessary, the natives, so he and other elite wealthy people could take over those lands and speculate and become even wealthier. Did you know that? I didn't. And it does relate to the police. The police protect and serve the wealthy people's property. You know, this is not my country yet. There's another book I've read that's called Challengers to Duopoly: Why Third Parties Matter in United States Two-Party Politics. I have been a very active Green Party member since 2013. As these two guys know, that are sitting right behind each other. And it has peace groups in it too. The national and the state has the peace groups. But what was fascinating is these 2 pages I put together into one page that I email everybody. I'm going to give it to you, David. And it showed that Social Security and child labor laws were started by a coalition of 4 third parties, including at least 1 or 2 socialist parties. And so the third parties will bring up these issues. People will say, yeah, that makes sense. That's what we want. Maybe we don't get elected, but if we can get people roused up to where the Democrats will say, oh, we invented that, like they did with the Green New Deal, which was 2007 by 2 young British Green Party men. Nothing to do with this country, but, you know, we Greens bring it in, and then they water it down, no pun intended, and now they think that...
Thank you, Sherry. Sherry Wells. I'm just curious. I know you put your pin in here, but where would you put the Green Party, for example, on this chart?
It's mixed up.
I like what Laura was saying about some of us don't know how anti-capitalist, anti-imperialism we really are. And when I send pictures of the people wearing orange here, I am going to find a way to put that in there, that Moms Demand Action needs to realize the anti-capitalism of the gun manufacturers. So thank you. There's just organizations that, like she said, they don't know where they stand, and we need to quietly, firmly educate them where they should be.
But in the meantime, I want to make a point that, as I was studying this kind of concept here, groups are wide. They can be very wide. They can be a range from here to here. For example, a group could be from here to here. And individuals within the groups can be right there, or right there, or whatever, you know. So it's not like your entire group thinks alike. But all of us here have an interest in fighting imperialism. I assume that's why you're here. And we all appreciate the fact that it's an important issue to address. And it's hard to get people together to talk about imperialism. And you are heroes for being here. And thank you for being here on such a beautiful day and talking about this sort of stuff. So we have more speakers to talk. I just want to add that in here. I also want to mention a book I read that I really loved a lot. It's called How to Hide an Empire by Danielle Immerwahr. It's quite an amazing book. How to Hide an Empire, A History of the Greater United States. And it tells all about how the empire business started back in 1898 with the Anti-Imperialist League. And that's when empire started in the U.S., when we went past our borders, when we went out to our borders, and it was the Philippines and Cuba and those Guam. That's where our empire started. But then we hid it for a long time. We didn't call it an empire. As a matter of fact, if many of you remember, if you call the U.S. an empire, like maybe 10 years ago, people would be pissed, you don't call us that. But now they're proud to be called an empire. Some people are, so. It's changing. It's changing. We're taking, those who want to take over the world because we're the best country in the world and we have the best morality. So whatever beliefs we have, we should share that with the rest of the world. And if they don't want it, we have to make sure they would take it. So that's pretty much how this government works. And I don't believe that way. I mean, I think there's other countries that have some good ideas too that may be better than ours. But that's the problem with empire. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So we got a lot of speakers. Go ahead, just one after another.
Hi, my name is Joey. I'm a member of the Young Communist League here at Wayne State University. And I wanted to speak briefly about the specific strategy that's employed by the United States, not just in Ukraine, but a variety of countries. And there is a name for it. It's called hybrid war. And actually the name first came out of this. There's a Russian military strategy book that was written, I can't remember when, it's by Andrew Kay. I think it's titled Hybrid War. If you don't want to read a boring Russian military strategy book, it is. There's also an Indian Marxist by the name of Vijay Prashad who speaks on hybrid war. And it started this thing sort of emerged out of the post-Soviet period in the 90s. And the learner speaker, sorry, I forget your name. Tobin? Yeah, Tobin, sorry. You talked about the relevance of NGOs in this pretty complicated strategy that they have. In Ukraine, the National Endowment for Democracy was there, and they are essentially a CIA front, training people in statescraft. They were training a wide variety of people, including neo-Nazis and far-right-wing people, and they did deploy quite a bit of violence to these ends. But this isn't something that just happens in Ukraine. There's actually a whole section of countries that border Russia that they have tried to deploy this strategy. And the aim is to rouse popular support amongst the public for a revolutionary moment, but actually they end up siding with Western powers. And they concede power to these different organizations, politicians, and in Ukraine it took the shape of, immediately after the Euromaidan Revolution in 2014, the fourth largest corn industry, which was previously nationalized and to some extent used to fund public services, was privatized. The private banks, at the time the largest private bank, which held quite a bit of debt to Germany, was nationalized, and private debt was transformed into public debt, and that meant austerity for Ukrainians. So they're not interested in democracy or providing a better life to any of these people. In fact, when austerity is implemented, quite a few people die. It happens in the United States, anywhere else. When there's poverty, people die. And I was paying attention to Ukraine a little bit before the war broke out, and they called it an unprovoked war. I thought that was really kind of interesting because they had their people in there prior. So I just wanted to highlight this strategy that is employed by them. Because if you pay attention to the different countries where there are these popular uprisings and you look at who's funding them, where the connections are, a lot of times they're not actually democratic uprisings. They just call themselves that.
Hi everyone. My name's Spencer. I'm a member of the Communist Party. And I wanted to say a couple things about the connection between imperialism abroad and fascism at home. Before Russia invaded Ukraine, this whole conflict started in 2014 with the Euromaidan coup and all of that. Throughout the period between 2014 and now, there have been open Nazis fighting in Ukraine, the Azov Battalion and other groups. And these groups were known to Western outlets way before Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. And they were rightfully calling them out, saying that Ukraine has a far-right problem, they have a Nazi problem. Now, you'd be called a Republican conspiracy theorist if you mention this. And these Nazis fighting and being celebrated as heroes, defending Ukraine against the Eastern Russian orcs or whatever terrible things are calling them, that directly affects us here. We have numerous, undescribable amounts of far-right, white supremacist militia groups going over to Ukraine, tens of thousands of people going, fighting with Nazis, getting combat experience, and further being radicalized. And eventually this war will end, and eventually these people will come back home. And we've already seen little flashes of what that violence would look like. For example, in Buffalo a couple weeks ago. These people are going to commit violence. It's a hard thing to really talk about and really conceive, but it's important to do so because, well, yes, America funding these wars abroad takes away resources away from the people who need them here. They're also funding and fomenting this culture of violence, which will come back to bite us. It's not just the thing of Americans using Ukrainians and only Ukrainians dying, or only Yemeni people dying, or Palestinians, or whoever. It's going to be Americans, people who look like me and you, that are going to directly suffer violently from these contradictions of imperialism. And even outside of straight fascist violence, you have, with imperialism and the cultivation of war, this psychological increasement of violence, in that violence is acceptable. And you see that in outbursts such as the massive amounts of mass shootings and school shootings. These problems, it's not just an economic thing, it's not just a foreign thing, it interconnects with every aspect of our society. And if we truly want to create a society based off of peace, the issue at hand is to dismantle capitalism and to dismantle imperialism.
Hello everybody, my name is Mitchell Bonga, and I'm a member of the Party for Socialism and Liberation. I'd just like to thank the Michigan Peace Council for hosting this event. I'm looking forward to parts 2 and 3 that were promised. Because it is so crucial that we get together to talk about this amongst ourselves, amongst our community. And there's not really much more I can say that hasn't already been covered. We all know that imperialism is an inherent feature of capitalism, that with every president, every Congress, it'll just keep going and going until it just continues to harm people. And that's why I'd just like to invite all those activists and organizations that are interested, some of us within the area, including the PSL, CPUSA, Freedom Road Socialist Organization, YDSA, a couple others, and a lot of activists like Sammie Lewis. We've been trying to put together and continue an anti-imperialist coalition, and we were having some good conversations just like these, because it is so crucial that we continue organizing, that we continue pushing this forward, because if nobody else will, then the consensus will continue to be within the imperialist camp. So, yeah, if you're interested in continuing this, looking forward to the Michigan Peace Council doing so, but it's important that we continue doing this all over, so thank you very much.
Hi everyone, my name is Danielle Francisca. I am with the Detroit Club of the CPUSA. I want to give a shout out to my comrades over here for doing a fantastic job with what they've been saying. They've said a lot that I really can't even add more to, but I do have one thing that I wanted to bring up as we talk about anti-imperialism and peace, and that is that of the over 700 bases that the U.S. has spread across the globe, that's a lot of small economies that have turned to depending on the tourism industry, but particularly the sex trade. And that's a lot of military personnel who are in these areas and promoting the sex trade in these places and perpetuating sex trafficking and forced prostitution, which is a form of economic coercion. So it is very economic anti-imperialism. And just as much that police brutality is clear in this country, where we recognize that we can't end imperialism abroad if we can't end police brutality, and if we can't reach our goal of defunding the police here in the U.S., it's the same with the sex trade. We can't expect that the forced prostitution, that sex trafficking, and all these related kind of mechanisms of the sex trade, including forced sterilization within the U.S. among Native American women and Latinas. We can't expect that these will end without a proper analysis of the sex trade within the U.S. as well. And what happens to young femme bodies, both transgender women and all women really, and also non-women as well. What happens to them within the U.S. and how this also interconnects with the sex trade across the globe, and how that relates to imperialism and is perpetuated by imperialism and also capitalism completely. So I just wanted to add that in. And I really was not prepared to say anything today, but I wanted to make sure that we did recognize that because it's connected. So that's part of the anti-imperialist struggle, and when we're fighting for peace, we're fighting for peace for, you know, additionally the violence against transgender bodies, the violence against femme bodies, and that's part of anti-imperialism. So,
thank you.
Thank you, Bill, and the people that spoke. It was really a good presentation. Look forward, and Spencer and Mitch were suggesting that we do a couple more of these, and I'd like to recommend that one of them be on white Christian nationalism. That's another word for racism. A lot of people, you know, ordinary people don't know what it is, but these are the people that really are pushing the extreme racist, pro-cop, anti-choice, all the other things. These are the people also are part of a worldwide movement. The Conservative Political Action Committee that usually meets in the United States decided to have their meeting this year in Hungary. And Orban, the president of Hungary, is Putin's best friend in Europe. The white Christian nationalists used to be a fringe element within our society. They are now part of the mainstream. They are the Republican Party. And what they're doing is even scarier. I mean, I remember hearing about imperialism in 1964 when I was about to get inducted. And I said, well, what the hell is this? For the next year, I did a lot of studies. So I learned a lot about imperialism from my direct experience. But I hope we can do a forum on white Christian nationalism. I think it's something we need to get ready because these are the people who are going to steal the election in 2022, bring Trump back in 2024. I'm not saying they will, but that's their agenda. We need to be prepared to know who they are and to be able to talk to our friends and neighbors about who these people are and how dangerous they are. They are not the ones who are fighting for freedom and the right to vote and security and so on. Anyway, my suggestion is to do a forum on white Christian nationalism. Thank you.
Thank you, my brother, Sam Stark, who some people confuse the two of sometimes. I don't know why. Not politically, but I mean visually. But you're going to have that forum. I'm trying to work another one on this one. So we're going to do I'll come to your forum when you put the white nationalism. All right, but you know, in other words, we need to do more of this, and I can tell from what everybody's been saying that it's fun to get together with comrades, with people who think sort of along the same line, and we find new allies. It's a wonderful feeling to be in a room. It's 4 o'clock. We exactly ended on time, but we're not going to end on time because we have one more speaker. Oh, sure, go ahead.
When we have the next one, everybody tries to bring a minute on one person with you.
Yeah, sure. Now that we know that nobody's going to get hurt. Yeah. We all like each other. So I want to remind you that tomorrow night, the Michigan Peace Council is having our monthly membership meeting. You don't have to be a member to join it because at 7 o'clock, we're going to have a continuation discussion about Puerto Rico. We have 2 great activists, Puerto Rican activists, who are going to speak at the beginning for about an hour, 45 minutes, an hour. Then we'll have a membership meeting. You can hang on or you don't have to hang for that part. But we encourage you to join our organization. If you'd like to, you can do that by going to the website, which is uspeacecouncil.org. We also have our own website, michiganpeacecouncil.org. But this has been a great experience, and I feel really uplifted, especially by seeing young people thinking this way. I mean, there's hope for the future here. I mean, it was getting pretty dismal there for a few decades. So now it's getting better. Thank you, folks, for being here. All of you. You're very helpful.